I'm James Rosone.
And I'm Miranda Watson. We're the husband and wife writing team that created the military thriller Monroe Doctrine series and the military sci-fi series The Rise of the Republic.
We have some additional content we'd like to share with you guys today, and we hope you'll find it informative and entertaining. We're planning to create more videos similar to this in the future.
As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get started.
Chapter 40. Extract SF Team. 14th August 1990. Special Forces Team. Salwa, Saudi Arabia. Captain Harris's team had been in their hide position for 3 days. In that time, they had directed a total of 6 airstrikes from the carrier in the Gulf of Oman, and the result was burning and destroyed vehicles stretching for miles across the desert. They had concentrated the strikes on air defense weapons and fuel trucks, but would target a tank if no AA or fuel trucks were present. Anything they could destroy would be of benefit in the upcoming conflict. The sun was just beginning to brighten up the eastern sky when SFC Weekly and Mr. Garrett came in from putting in an airstrike along the road in the vicinity of Salwa. Secondary explosions could still be seen. As they were dropping their equipment, Captain Harris approached them. "I see you boys had a fun night," he said with a shit-eating grin on his face. "Sir, they're making it too easy. Noise and light discipline doesn't seem to be in their vocabulary. The forward units may be tuned in to light discipline, but those rear echelon dudes are clueless. We had no problem locating and targeting fuel trucks or air defense weapons," Weekly replied jovially. As the three reviewed the night's activities, Staff Sergeant Donovan approached. "Excuse me, sir, we just got a flash message from higher," Donovan said. That got everyone's attention as Lovett and Caldwell had joined the group as well. "Sir, higher wants us to move out and head for Qatar for an extraction tonight. They sent the coordinates for a pickup point just across the border. The Qatar Air Force is sending a Sea King helicopter to pick us up. We'll be flown to Abu Nakhla Airfield, where a civilian jet is waiting to fly us to Muscat," Donovan informed them. "How far is the pickup point?" Caldwell asked. "I want to check everyone's feet before we take off. No time to come down with foot blisters." "The pickup point is just across the border, about 2.5 miles, Donovan said. "I plotted it out." "Damn, that's close. I guess the Iraqis aren't going into Qatar just yet," Harris commented. "Why do you think that is, Captain?" Caldwell probed. They'd been taking bets the last few days about when the Iraqis would invade the next country. Colonel Wright said that the UAE and Kuwait were pushing hard on Saddam to pay back the money he owed them for funding his war with Iran. He considered it a gift that didn't need to be paid back. They also refused to cut their oil production, which depressed the price of oil, which further deprived Iraq of money. Saddam was desperate for money. Wright said that Qatar didn't press him for repayment, offering to put the loan on hold for several years. Qatar also agreed to cut oil production to help Saddam. None of these concessions hurt Qatar's economy. As it is, they're sitting on the world's third largest oil reserve and have huge natural gas resources on top of it. Wright thinks Saddam is just giving them breathing room. The more I've thought about it, the more I think Saddam might make a play to get them to side with him. Colonel Wright still thinks Saddam will hit them before this is over, Captain Harris went on to explain. "Okay, guys, it's going to be light soon, so let's get settled in for the day and be ready to move out right after dark. Steak and eggs for breakfast tomorrow," Weekly said, and everyone dispersed to settle in for the day. 5 hours later, Donovan said in a low voice, "Captain, you best wake up." He was lying on the ground next to the officer. "What's up?" Harris croaked sleepily. "Sir, we have company approaching," Donovan said and pointed to the north. Harris couldn't see anything from his hide position. He moved to get a better look at what Donovan was pointing at. "Oh shit," he finally whispered, as SFC Weekly crawled up next to him. "What you got, sir?" Weekly asked as he poked his head over the hide position. "What we have, Sergeant Weekly, is a patrol of what appears to be 5 guys walking this way. They seem to be lollygagging, but they just might come across our position," Harris replied as he handed his binoculars to Weekly. The senior non-com studied them for a moment. "Sir, I think they're heading for the farm and orchard over there. I knew someone would wander over there before we got out of here. I don't think they know we're here, but best not give them any reason to suspect we're here either. I'll make sure everyone stays put, and we'll keep an eye on them and the farm," Weekly declared, confident that his plan would work. For the rest of the afternoon, someone was on guard, specifically watching the farm to the north of their position to see if the patrol would leave or stay. Once the Iraqi patrol had moved inside the farm compound, they hadn't seen any further movement. To the east, the direction they would be traveling to reach the pickup point, traffic was moving on the road with approximately 50 meters between each vehicle. They were dispersing themselves better as they moved since the airstrikes had started. They'd need to figure out how to cross the road after dark if the convoy was still moving through the area. As darkness descended on the desert, the team gathered up their equipment. Footprints were the only thing they wanted to leave behind, and they would attempt to erase those as well. Lovett took point and started moving to the east on the azimuth that Captain Harris had assigned him. He was followed by Mr. Garrett, who was serving as compass and paceman. GPS was starting to replace the need for a paceman, but old habits were hard to kill. As they slipped past the backside of the farm compound, they could hear music playing on a radio or television. Hopefully it would hold the attention of whoever was inside. The real challenge was going to be getting across the highway. The closer they approached, the lower they crouched as they walked. "Thank God there's no moon tonight. It'll make this next part of our plan work out a lot better," Captain Harris thought optimistically. When they got within 50 meters of a berm near the highway, Mr. Garrett gave the signal for everyone to get down in the prone position. Then he crawled back to Captain Harris, explaining, "We're in position to set the charges. I'm going to take Cardwell with me. I don't think it'll take more than an hour for us to get up there, rig it, and get back to you. We'll also figure out where we should hold up prior to us blowing this thing." Chief Warrant Officer 3 Garrett had explained this plan to him and Weekly before they'd left their hide position. He said that during a SOG mission along the Chinese-North Vietnamese border, they had run into a similar situation. He told them how they'd handled that one and figured they could repeat it here. "Good luck," Harris whispered, and motioned for Cardwell to go with him. The two of them set off, crawling along the ground towards the road. All the rest of the team could do at this point was stay prone and wait. Sometimes that was the hardest part. One's mind would begin to wander instead of staying focused on what was happening. Sometimes sleep would come calling and attempt to lull one into pleasant comfort, or simply entice one to black out from sheer exhaustion. Other times, crawling creatures such as scorpions or camel spiders would decide to track across one's body. Occasionally, a desert viper might snuggle up to one to keep warm. After what felt like an eternity but was actually only an hour, Chief Garrett and Cardwell reappeared. "How did it go?" Harris whispered softly. "We're good to go, sir. Nothing like leaving a going-away present," he whispered back. Harris couldn't see the man's face, but he was pretty sure it had a big grin on it. The chief added, "We spotted a small berm that runs parallel to the highway. It's 50 or so meters away. I suggest we move to it. It'll put us that much closer to the road once the festivities begin." Harris grunted at the information. "I'm so glad this guy's on my team," he thought. "That's a good idea, Chief. Let's get a move on then. I want to get across the border and to the pickup point ASAP." In the dark, the ODA crawled across the desert floor with their rucks on their backs and their rifles cradled in their arms. If anyone was looking in their direction with night vision goggles, they would have thought a family of giant Galapagos tortoises were moving across the desert. When they reached the sand berm, they stopped and rested. A few of the guys grabbed their canteens and proceeded to drink most of the contents down. Some grabbed for some leftover remnants from their MREs. Crawling 50 meters with 120 pounds on your back didn't make for an easy trip. As they lay there, one truck after another drove past their position. This was a particularly large convoy. That or the Iraqis had finally gotten their spacing down, because this thing seemed to drag on for a long while. Most of the vehicles were running with blackout lights, so the drivers and any passengers could only see the road immediately in front of them. The team was betting that the drivers on these supply vehicles had not been issued night vision goggles. They lay there watching several cargo trucks with equipment or supplies roll past their position. Finally, Captain Harris spotted the kinds of trucks he was looking for with his night vision goggles. 2 troop carrier vehicles were approaching, one following the other, and they appeared to have troops in the back. He tapped Garrett on the shoulder and pointed. Garrett got the message. The first troop carrier rolled past their position. When the second one approached, Chief Garrett flipped the switch on the detonator in his hand. Simultaneously, 2 explosions went off, taking out both vehicles in a giant fireball. The vehicles to the front of this scene accelerated away and scattered across the desert. The trucks following slammed on their brakes and also began to scatter to the 4 winds. In that moment, they thought an airstrike was happening, and the last thing they wanted to do was bunch up and give the Americans an even better target to shoot at. In the kill zone, the 2 troop carriers were on fire as they ground to a halt. Some of the soldiers threw themselves over the sides. A few had stumbled out of the vehicle. Some held their ears in pain. A few had their clothes on fire. One Iraqi just ran down the road like a flaming Roman candle, screaming and flailing his arms about until he collapsed. Another soldier who was on fire did the smart thing. He stopped, dropped, and rolled to put out the flames. Once he'd succeeded, he just lay there moaning loudly for help. In a way, it was a sickening sight to behold. To know they had inflicted this kind of suffering on their fellow man wasn't exactly something they felt proud of. "Let's go," Harris shouted to be heard by his men. He jumped up and started moving swiftly in a hunched-over position, his body threaded between the 2 stricken vehicles. Although they ran between 2 burning vehicles and a number of Iraqi soldiers spread out on the ground, some tending to their wounded friends, others just trying to figure out what had happened, no one questioned or stopped them. In these soldiers' minds, this had been caused by another airstrike, and that was exactly what Harris and the team wanted them to think. The team ran across the road essentially undetected amidst the chaos. Knowing that the Qatari border was only 250 meters away, they picked up their pace and ran in a full upright position until they spotted the demarcation fence between the 2 countries. When the Special Forces team approached the fence, Chief Garrett already had a pair of wire cutters out and in his hand. He was hard at work snipping link after link in the fence. He started at the bottom and worked his way up, then cut across, giving them a wide enough space to fit their bodies and their rucks. It took him less than a couple of minutes, and he was through. He then motioned for the others to follow him through quickly. When everyone was through the hole, the team maintained a tactical posture. Technically, they should be safe, but a large Iraqi convoy was still only a few hundred meters away. Sergeant Weekly pulled out their GPS receiver and got their exact location. He then connected it to the anticipated pickup point and led the way. 15 minutes later, they'd reached the point and fanned out. They assumed a 360-degree perimeter, with everyone facing out and in a prone position. No one was taking any chances in case some Iraqis had followed them across the border. They were going to sit tight and wait until their ride out of this place arrived, and they would be able to fly away. Then they heard the most wonderful sound a grunt behind enemy lines could hear. The twin-engine helicopter was approaching totally blacked out. Donovan activated one of their IR chem sticks and tossed it out away from their position. The helicopter spotted it right away and altered its approach, landing not far from the chemstick. No invitation was needed. Once that bird was on the ground and the door opened, the ODA team ran aboard and took a seat. When the helicopter took off, Captain Harris saw 2 crew chiefs manning the side guns and a lone figure sitting nearby in civilian clothes. Despite the whooshing of the air and the rhythmic thumping of the rotor blades, the man in civilian clothes spoke as he used his foot to shove a cooler down towards them. "Thought I would get out of the office and enjoy a little night flying, Captain. Would you like a beer?" A grin spread across Harris's face. "Is that you, Colonel Wright? You think some other colonel would jump on a helicopter in the middle of the night with a cooler full of beers?" "Of course it's me," replied Wright with a laugh. Wright lifted one of the bottles to his lips. At this point, the other members of the team had all grabbed for a bottle and were doing the same thing. Sergeant Weekly was the first man to spit the cold liquid right out of his mouth as he shouted, "It's fucking near beer, guys, don't do it!" This caused everyone to break out in laughter. Wright laughed the hardest at the comment before shouting back to the snake eaters, "This is still a dry country. When we get you back to the embassy, we'll see if there might be a real one somewhere we can scrounge up for you." Harris looked at Wright. "Thank you, sir, for coming to get us. I wasn't sure how much longer our luck was going to hold up there." Wright nodded, then placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "You guys did an outstanding job, but it was time to bring you in. We have big plans for you guys. It's time to get you rested up and ready for your next mission." Chapter 41. Third Invasion. 15th of August, 1990. 1st Republican Guard Corps, Al-Batha, Saudi Arabia. The American Navy had launched several airstrikes against the 1st Republican Guard Corps, but not enough to seriously cripple the forward progress. The only exception was in the case of the 18th Brigade of the 1st Armored Division. That brigade was now in Salwa, being refitted. General al-Ujaili was confident that he could still achieve his mission of seizing Abu Dhabi with his remaining 3 brigades. There was an excellent highway from Al-Batha on the border to Al-Sila. It was a clear shot to Abu Dhabi, with several gas stations in the form of refineries along the way to refuel his vehicles without having to use his own supplies. The towns along the route were small and would offer token resistance, if any. The soil along the northwest coast of Qatar was lithosol, rocky soil, which was only 10 centimeters deep over hard underlying limestone. Lithosol soil is calcareous, sandy loam, covered with rock debris, and almost ideal for track vehicles. The decision was made that no track vehicles would travel on the paved highway, as it was reserved for wheeled vehicles. Track vehicles tore up a paved highway, especially when the temperatures were in the 120-degree Fahrenheit range. When the lead elements of the 1st Battalion moved out along the highway, General al-Ujaili was surprised that no resistance was offered at the Al-Batha-Guwaifat border crossing point. He couldn't determine if it was a case of resigned surrender by the UAE customs officers or a welcome mat. The 2nd Battalion's track vehicles were moving well on the right flank, with the 1st Battalion on the left. He kept his 3rd Battalion in reserve, following the 2nd Battalion a few miles back. He wanted his reserve unit somewhat close by in case they did run into some resistance. Within the first 20 minutes, the 1st Battalion reported passing Al-Sila and still no opposition. While the lead elements moved through the city, elements from the 3rd Battalion would enter the town to make sure no resistance was being formed to cause problems in his rear area. General al-Ujaili knew the 2nd Al-Medina Armored Division would be following him several kilometers back, but wouldn't interfere with his ability to maneuver should he need to. To the south, the 3rd Tawakkalna Mechanized Division was moving towards the border with Oman. He could see the cloud of dust to his south indicating their direction. Taking a deep breath in as he watched the formations of vehicles around him, General al-Ujaili wished he could be observing this from a helicopter. From the air, this must be a wondrous sight. 4 divisions moving in unison to seize a country. Maybe I can get up in a helicopter later today and observe this sight before it is gone. General Dulamy, the 1st RG Corps commander, was already up in his helicopter observing the force below him. It always excited him to see his corps in a formation rolling across an open desert. He had positioned his helicopter behind the 1st Hammurabi Armored Division and ahead of the 2nd Al-Medina Armored Division. To his right front, he could observe the dust column rising from the vehicles of the 6th Nebuchadnezzar Mechanized Division as they began to pull further away from the 1st Hammurabi Armored Division. While the 6th pulled away and headed for their objectives, the way was opening for the 3rd Mechanized Division to move to the Oman-UAE border and establish a screen line, serving as the Corps' covering force should anyone attempt to attack out of Oman. The road distance from Al-Batha to Abu Dhabi was almost 320 kilometers. Dulamy knew it would be difficult to make that distance in one day. It would be tomorrow sometime that General Al-Ujaili would reach his objective of Abu Dhabi, and then another 128 kilometers for General Al-Tikriti to reach Dubai. The 3rd would have the most difficulty, as there were few roads and the terrain was high dunes. Fortunately, the dune pattern ran east to west, so it was possible for track and wheel vehicles to travel between the dunes and not have to traverse them perpendicular to their advance. Fortunately, there was only one paved road that ran along the border between the UAE and Oman. This would make it easy to run patrols and observe the Omani side of the border. The 3rd would anchor its left flank in Al Ain, and the 2nd could cover the border north of there once it had secured Dubai Sharjah. The rugged mountain terrain to the east, with only 1 or 2 passable roads, would preclude a force of any size coming from this direction. Once his forces had seized Dubai, his reconnaissance units would find him a suitable place to establish his headquarters and sleeping quarters. Someplace nice, near a mosque, and maybe even with a pool. Yes, that'd be nice, he thought. Brigadier General Juwad Assad was not so optimistic about taking this next objective. His division, 3rd Tawakkalna Mechanized Division, was a fast mobile division with tanks and infantry fighting vehicles. They were best suited to mobility warfare, dancing around an enemy force like a boxer moves between strikes. Asking them to transform themselves into an occupation force was a tall ask. His next objective, Al Ain, was a major city with several universities. It had a population of more than 600,000, and while it was essentially an island oasis in the desert along the Omani border, it was also home to a number of ancient forts and archaeological sites, which could complicate his efforts to fortify the area. General Dulamy had discussed the importance of his men treading lightly with the locals. He wanted them to use kid gloves as much as possible. He also didn't want him to position a lot of his armor units within the city, if possible. The leadership back in Baghdad was emphatic about ensuring the Iraqi army appeared as liberators and not conquerors. President Saddam believed if they came across as liberators, the population might ultimately support them, which would make forming up additional militia forces to work with their forces substantially easier. In light of these restraints being placed on him, General Assad decided on placing only a single battalion in Al Ain to work with local police and maintain a semblance of normality. The rest of the division would look to establish defensive positions along the Omani border and start preparing a defense in depth of the border. If the Americans planned to cross at his portion of the border, then his men would make them pay in blood for every meter of territory they captured. When he'd needed to figure out where to establish his own headquarters, he'd decided on the Al-Jahili Fort. It was centrally located in the city and easily defended. It was also close to the airport, out of which his aviation unit and air defense systems would be operating. For the time being, it'd work. Beyond that, it was in God's hands now as to what would come next. As the 1st Hammurabi Armored Division approached Abu Dhabi, it became obvious that word of their pending arrival had preceded them. Cars were parked, leaving virtually no traffic on the roads. Doors to shops and businesses were closed, some were even boarded up. Children were absent from the streets, and so were the main street vendors. The propaganda machine had been throwing out false stories about Iraqi soldiers committing atrocities in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia as they approached the UAE. Al-Ujaili knew they weren't true. Now they needed to show the people of Abu Dhabi they were lies being told by the West. When General Al-Ujaili's vehicle had finally stopped in a nearby park, he got out and stretched his legs. For the next couple of hours, he wanted to use this place as his corps' headquarters until his people could find a more suitable location. As he gazed at a couple of birds in a tree nearby, his thoughts were intruded upon when a staff officer called out to him. "General, you are needed." Al-Ujaili turned to look at the major. "What is it?" "Sir, we just received a request for your assistance from one of our lead elements as they reached the outskirts of Mohammed bin Zayed city. The captain leading the unit said they've spotted a group of police cars displaying white flags as they blocked the road leading into the city. The patrol is requesting instructions." "What do you mean they want instructions? Did they not ask for a meeting, or are a few police cars powerful enough to stop our tanks? Get back to him and ask for more details," Al-Ujaili ordered, annoyed that this junior officer appeared not to be taking the initiative to talk with the police officers and find out what was going on. "That's going to have to change if we are ever going to achieve greatness. I can't have platoon, company, and battalion commanders unable to think for themselves and improvise when needed," he thought. A few minutes later, the staff officer returned. "Sir, they say the mayor of Abu Dhabi wishes to speak with you. He has had a tent and a meal prepared to sit with you," the major explained. Al-Ujaili thought about this for a minute. Why the mayor and not the sultan himself, or at least someone from the royal family? This is almost an insult. "All right, I will come and speak with him," Al-Ujaili said, as he climbed into his staff car. "Sir, would you like to change out of that uniform into something more appropriate?" the major politely asked. "No, I would not. I am a soldier here to do a soldier's duty. We are not here to coddle these people. We are here to govern. Now let's go." While General Al-Ujaili's vehicle drove through the city, he was pleased to see the discipline and professionalism of his soldiers as they interacted with the local civilians. He was also pleased to see the tracked vehicles were off the roads with their gun turrets pointing away at 45-degree angles. His BTRs and other wheeled vehicles were on the sides of the road, allowing traffic to pass. As they started to enter a more suburban area, Al-Ujaili noticed the police cars with white flags and a tent off to the side of the road. Several men in white robes, the typical attire in the UAE, were standing around waiting for him. His driver steered them in that direction. When the vehicle stopped, he got out and approached the group. "I am General Al-Ujaili, commander of the 1st Hammurabi Armored Division. Who is the mayor here?" he asked in a loud and authoritative tone. The group briefly exchanged looks before a middle-aged man stepped forward. "Allah wa salam, General." He extended his hand. "Salam alaikum. And who are you?" "General, I am Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan. I am also the acting governor of Abu Dhabi. My father is the emir of Abu Dhabi, but he is out of the country currently at our home in England. I can speak for my father. Please let us enjoy some tea and discuss our mutual interest," the young man offered as he motioned for the general to follow him into the tent. The tent floor was a carpet so deep one sank at least an inch in the thickness. Several trays were arranged with fruit and cheese as well as cold milk and tea. A portable air conditioner cooled the interior to a comfortable 90 degrees. Large pillows were scattered about for the sheikh and general to sit. "Damn, I should have changed into something more formal. I'm sure I must smell like a goat farmer right now, Al-Ujaili thought privately. Once comfortably situated, the Sheikh started the conversation. General, your army has traveled far and made an impressive campaign. But why have you ventured into my country? We have not demanded payment for the war you fought with Iran. We have even cut our oil production to assist in raising the price of oil, as your Prime Minister requested. What do you hope to gain by entering our territory like this? The Sheikh's voice was very even and soft as he questioned the Iraqi general. Sheikh Khalifa, we are not here as conquerors. Our army is here to ensure that no outside forces enter your kingdom from Oman or the Persian Gulf. We wish to ensure that peace will prevail in the UAE now and into the future. We have no desire to interfere in your kingdom. Once we are assured that no Western forces will invade Saudi Arabia through your country, we will depart. Al-Ujaili paused for a moment as he took a sip of his tea before looking at the crown prince. We are all Arab brothers, but the House of Saud does not view all of us as brothers. They view themselves as the lords of the Middle East to govern and rule over us. Iraq believes we are all equal brothers in Allah. We do not wish to see the Saudis pressure you or any other Arab nation in the future, as they have in the past. Our end goal is to unite all Arab brothers into one Arab nation to hold the Persians back and stop the West's attempt to seize more control over our lands and import their brand of morals and idolatry, corrupting our youth, General Al-Ujaili said. Sheikh Khalifa said nothing for a few moments as he thought about what the general had said. He reached for his own tea and took a couple of sips. Then he ate a single date before returning his attention to the Iraqi general. General, if I understand what you are saying, your army intends to stay in my nation for an undetermined period of time, correct? General Al-Ujaili nodded slowly. Sheikh Khalifa, I am not going to try and deceive you or your father, the Sultan. I am also not going to pretend my force will only be here for a few weeks or a couple of months. I cannot say with certainty how long my force will be here. That will largely depend on the Americans and the West. As of right now, everything depends on what the Americans are going to do next. The Americans have already attacked my soldiers with their air force. However, I am hopeful that between our foreign minister and the foreign ministers of China, France, and the Soviet Union, we may ultimately be able to secure some sort of peace deal or ceasefire that will keep the West out of the Middle East. He paused for a moment as the Sheikh took the information in before adding, My forces will require some accommodations while we are here. In return, I would like to extend some job opportunities to your people who may be interested in working in our motor pool, servicing the thousands of vehicles in my corps. Our engineer brigade will also be looking to hire thousands of individuals to help us dig anti-tank ditches and berms in the desert and other facilities to shore up the defense of your territory from an American invasion. Sheikh Khalifa nodded, acknowledging the request and the information before adding, Yes, General. I fully understand and expected you to make a request like this before we met. If you will allow me. He motioned to one of those standing nearby to approach them. This man will coordinate your needs and assist in getting you and your soldiers suitable accommodations. In the meantime, you will stay in my home as my invited guest until we have found a suitable accommodation befitting a man of your stature. Thank you, Sheikh Khalifa. I am at a loss for words at your generous offer to have me stay at your residence while I am here in Abu Dhabi, Al-Ujaili replied. If you can show me where it is located, I will make sure my division commanders know as well. Perhaps your father won't mind us staying in his home since he is out of the country and likely won't be returning for some time, correct? The Sheikh suddenly realized the Iraqi general had just taken over a huge swath of his family's homes without so much as a word said in objection. Sheikh Khalifa did clumsily reply, I am sure he will not mind. If you will give me few hours to move my family, I will meet you back here in 4 hours if that is satisfactory. He will accompany you," he pointed at the coordinator that had previously been introduced, "and meet with our logistic officers so we may begin the process of getting your soldiers settled." Standing, the sheikh waited for the general to stand, and then shook his hand. He did not smile. "In 4 hours, General." Holding a hand up to stop the sheikh, the general said, "Excuse me, please do not move your family out of your residence. We will stay at your father's place because he is not here. But so long as you are here, we would not think of forcing your family to leave their residence. Please accept my forgiveness if it sounded like we were going to take over your residence as well." The sheikh's demeanor changed immediately, softening as he realized the general really was making a concerted effort not to appear like invading conquerors. Perhaps he had misjudged him. "Okay, General. Then we'll get things taken care of now and not bother with relocating my family. Thank you for that. I do appreciate it." Chapter 42. Engage the 14th. 15th August 1990. 1 to 325 Airborne Battalion. Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The 3 C-2 Greyhound aircraft landed at the Jeddah airport, keeping their engines running as they waited for the Marines and paratroopers to hop aboard. The Marine Air Naval Gunnery Liaison Company from the MEU, or Anglico for short, had been detailed to provide a team to accompany the soldiers of the 82nd who would provide security. The Anglico team, consisting of 2 Marines with a laser designator, were still at the base and had briefed the soldiers from the 82nd, traveling with them, on what to expect when landing on an aircraft carrier. The young Marines had shared stories that succeeded in instilling the fear of God into the paratroopers. When the C-2 Greyhound pulled up to the parking ramp and the waiting soldiers and Marines, the crew chief dropped the back ramp and signaled it was time for them to load up. Walking into the crew bay, the Tactical Air Control Party, or TACPs, from 1 to 325th Airborne Infantry Battalion climbed aboard. The 2 consisted of the 2 Air Force personnel, Captain Harrison and Master Sergeant James Kennedy. Harrison was an F-16 pilot who was now pulling a tour with the grunts before he was able to shift back to being a pilot again. While Harrison was the team leader, he had a squad of soldiers from 1st Platoon, Company A, 1st Battalion, 325th Infantry to provide security for the TACPs and the Anglico team. The soldiers had just been notified that they'd be tagging along with the TACPs to provide security, which gave them only an hour to pack their equipment and get ready. Aside from Captain Harrison, no one had any idea where they were going or what they would be doing. Once the Greyhound was loaded, it took off and headed straight for the Saratoga. The flight wasn't a terribly long one, but it was going to be the first time most of them had ever landed on a carrier. Once the plane came to a gut-wrenching screeching stop, they all hoped it would be their last C-2 carrier landing. When the plane powered down their engines, the crew chiefs got the doors opened, and the soldiers inside started bailing out, excited to still be alive. A flight deck member directed the soldiers to a nearby door that would lead them below decks. Someone from the flight deck took them down a couple of decks and to one of the Navy SEAL team rooms. They were going to stay there until it was time for them to load up on the next transport. Upon entering the room, Captain Harrison pointed to one of the walls. "All right, set your gear down and get comfortable. I'm heading up to a briefing to get some last-minute instructions, and then we'll figure out when we'll be leaving again. In the meantime, do a double check of your equipment. If you're missing anything, this is the last chance you'll have to grab it. So make sure you have everything you need. We're likely to be gone for a while once we leave." When Captain Harrison left, Staff Sergeant Davis took over. "Listen up, guys. I want you to double-check your water and weapons. This is the real deal. It's highly likely we'll end up seeing combat on this next mission, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let any of you pukes get me killed because you failed to bring something I told you to bring." Davis stared menacingly at his young soldiers as they did a quick check of their equipment. He'd laid out his own rucksack and LBE for them to look at, and told them to make theirs look exactly like his. No exceptions. He wanted uniformity in what they carried. Addressing the two young Marines, he asked, "Either of you been in combat with that laser designator?" "Me and Corporal Doss have used it in training exercises with live ordnance, but not in a combat situation," Sergeant Stevens responded. "Well, I suspect you're going to be the first in your unit to use them in combat. Don't screw it up," Davis told them. "Hoorah!" Sergeant Stevens and Corporal Doss responded in unison. Staff Sergeant Davis just rolled his eyes at the two young Marines. "When we head out to the bird, you all will need to grab 1 case of water. Keep that water with you and make sure you bring it with you when we land. That water is more valuable than bullets right now, so don't fuck it up and accidentally leave a case behind. Understand?" "Hoorah," came the single-word reply from Doss and Stevens. Turning to the assembled squad of infantry soldiers and the two young Marines, Sergeant Davis said, "God knows what kind of camel jockey water might be around when we get there, so we're going to stockpile these cases we'll be bringing. Once on the ground, I want a fucking perimeter set up around the captain and his team until they've done what they need to do. You two jarheads stick to the captain like glue," Davis ordered, pointing at Doss and Stevens. Continuing, "Remember, these are Chair Force Rangers. They think they're hot shit because they can call in airstrikes, but they ain't infantry like us. It's our job to protect them so the flyboys can lay the hurt on these Hajis. Once they've completed their missions, the carrier is going to send some choppers to come fetch us and bring us back here. Once we land, we can gloat all we want to with these jarheads how many Hajis we smoked. But until then, heads on a swivel, and try not to get me or these Air Force guys killed. Got it?" Davis bellowed at his soldiers. "Hooah, Sergeant!" The assembled groups responded with a couple of "Oorah" tossed in. Specialist Ford, the one guy who had no fear of asking simple or stupid questions no matter how many times he got his ass chewed over it, asked, "Sarge, if we come back to the carrier, that means we have to have another ride in that Greyhound thing, won't we? Couldn't they just drop us off at some airport and let us fly from there?" Specialist Ford was from Vidalia, Georgia. Oddly enough to his platoon mates, he wanted to be a fashion designer when his time in the Army was completed. His claim to fame with his squad was that he'd won the first Vidalia onion eating contest when he was in high school. Staff Sergeant Davis laughed at the question. "Come on, Ford, don't you like flying in the Greyhound?" "It's not that I don't like the ride. It's that sudden stop that scared the crap out of me," Ford complained. "Well, now you have no need to worry about that because a helicopter will bring us back to the ship, and the C-2 will fly us off," Davis answered with a smile. "Oh yeah, right. That won't be so bad then," Ford said with a thoughtful look. Sergeant Stevens and Corporal Doss exchanged looks and shook their heads. "Hey, dumbass," Jones spoke up. "How do you think the C-2 takes off from this thing? They launch it with a giant slingshot. You thought the landing was bad. Wait till you feel the exit." Ford just stood there, with a lost look on his face. The other members just laughed at his expense. When the captain returned, he motioned for everyone to gather around. "All right, listen up. We're being inserted by helicopter about 30 miles inland into some pretty nasty terrain. Our mission is to direct airstrikes against an Iraqi division that's moving down the road to the coast. This area has very limited roads and routes, so once they're hit, they're going to be pissed." Captain Harrison paused for a moment before he continued. "There's another TACP team working out of Jeddah with me. They've been working with a Saudi armor brigade to fight a delaying action back to Jeddah while we keep bringing in more tanks. When they carried out an ambush and airstrike not far from Buraydah, a major city and airport that straddles a major highway to Jeddah, the Iraqis called in a handful of Hinds." Staff Sergeant Davis muttered a few curse words under his breath, while a couple of other soldiers shook their heads. Needless to say, the Hinds tore the Saudi tanks apart and ripped the unit up pretty bad. The other TACP team barely made it out of there. I talked with the Marine detachment commander on board about this. He told me they do have a small number of Stingers on board. He offered 2 of his Marines who knew how to operate them. I told him I needed to talk with Staff Sergeant Davis first. Would you have a problem with 2 more Marines being added to the team? Grunting at the question, Staff Sergeant Davis looked at his squad, who all had grins on their faces. Sure, let's add more jarheads. But they need to know they work for me when we're on the ground. No ifs, ands, or buts about it, sir. Fair enough. Then let's go ahead and get our gear brought over to the hangar deck and load up. I'll tell the DIT commander to send his 2 guys over. We leave in 20 mics. When they got to the hangar deck, some Navy guys had just finished loading the birds up with the cases of water and other supplies they were bringing. Everything was being spread out between the 3 MH-60S Nighthawk helicopters. A couple of Marines then walked up to Staff Sergeant Davis and said they'd been assigned to join his squad. They looked just as young as the rest of his soldiers. Davis was starting to feel like an old man looking at all the faces of these Marines and soldiers. They looked like high school freshmen to his eyes. The Marines had their equipment ready, and 2 Stingers slung over their shoulders. "Staff Sergeant," one of the helicopter pilots shouted out to him as he walked over to the group of soldiers. "We're going to load the helicopters on the elevator to bring up to the flight deck. I want your squad to follow that helicopter as it gets loaded on the elevator. Once all the engines are spun up and ready, the flight deck personnel will tell you when to load up. We're spreading you guys across the 3 birds. Good luck on your mission." The Navy lieutenant then turned around to head back to his helicopter. 30 minutes later, the birds were in the air and flying fast over the water as they approached land. Sunset was rapidly approaching, which was fine with everyone involved who understood the limitations of night flight. None of the Army guys understood those limitations, so they had to put their faith in the hands of the Navy pilots. As the helicopters approached land, the 3 aircraft took up a trail formation and tuned east towards the rough terrain they'd have to fly through. They crossed the beach at low level, 200 feet, and flew towards a mountain range and canyon. Night vision goggles dropped down over the pilots' eyes as they deftly flew their aerial chariots. All the soldiers could see as the darkness began to envelop. Everything was the dimmed LED lights that bathed the cockpit in a warm green glow. After an hour of flight time, Captain Harrison turned to those in his aircraft and held up 2 fingers, meaning 2 minutes to touchdown. As the aircraft slowed, the only thing visible outside it was blackness. Dust swirling around the aircraft and a hard bump were the only indications that the bird was on the ground. The soldiers knew what to do and started tossing everything and everyone out. As soon as their feet hit the ground, they lay down and pointed their weapons outward, ready to exchange gunfire. Once the helicopters departed, stillness and darkness returned to the area. Captain Harrison wasted no time, ordering, "All right, let's get a head count and sensitive items check. Then we'll move out. Sergeant Davis, compass man, is to take a heading of 015 for 2 clicks. This is not going to be a walk in the park, so we'll cache the water and supplies about halfway to the objectives. Everyone ready?" Captain Harrison asked, as he looked around through his night vision goggles. "All right, let's move out." Staff Sergeant Davis placed Ford on point and Jones on compass and pace. He kept the 2 Marines towards the rear of his team, as well as the 2 with the laser designators. The terrain was mountainous and barren. Up one hill, down the backside, and then they'd face a bigger hill in front to climb. After 4 hours, they managed to reach the 2-kilometer point. "Okay, let's take a break. Drink some water," Captain Harrison directed. Everyone was soaking wet with perspiration. The desert fatigues were made of heavy canvas so you would sweat, and thus your sweat cooled the body as it evaporated. Field soldiers thought it was a pretty good uniform. The rear echelon office boys didn't like it and wanted a lightweight uniform. Of course, the rear echelon office boys had air-conditioned offices or tents, so what did they know? Sitting with his back against his rucksack, Captain Harrison called Davis over to talk. "Sergeant, here's our position. We'll now turn to a new heading of 035 degrees for 2 clicks. That will put us in a good position to overlook this road, as well as that valley. That valley will afford some protection to our fast movers as they come in low and fast." Davis only nodded, as he did his best to study the position with his NVGs on. Master Sergeant Kennedy, who'd largely been silent during the last few hours, looked over the terrain and position Harrison had identified. He'd been a TACP his entire career. This wasn't his first rodeo behind enemy lines. "I agree, sir. This looks like a good position to me. When is this division supposed to arrive in this area?" "Don't know for sure, but I suspect we won't be lonely for long," Harrison explained. "Hey, just be sure everyone continues to drink water. We'll leave half the cases here and take the rest with us." Davis then asked, "Sir, how long you figure on us being out here?" "As long as it takes to destroy a division of vehicles," the captain answered, as he removed his night vision goggles. The group cached half their supplies and got back on the move. It took them a few hours, but they eventually reached the position Harrison had identified. Once there, the soldiers went to work getting everyone set up in a defensive position. The soldiers also started creating their hide positions to help protect their bodies from the sun that would surely bake them once it was up. They also made sure there wasn't anything reflective sitting in a position that might give away their positions. As the sun started lighting the eastern sky, they no longer needed their NVGs. They would be able to use the good old-fashioned Mark I eyeball. Captain Harrison told Master Sergeant Kennedy it was time for them to get some shut-eye. He told Staff Sergeant Davis what they were going to do and recommended he start cycling his own guys through the same cycle. They'd had a long day and night. The men needed sleep. They also had no idea how long they'd have to wait for the Iraqis to start showing up. 2 hours later, Davis moved to Captain Harrison's position in a low crouch, so as not to be silhouetted on top of the hill. The captain and his NCO were deep in slumber, and Davis almost hated to wake them. Davis gently nudged the captain with his foot. "Sir, Captain Harrison, time to wake up, sir. We have company." Instantly, Captain Harrison and his NCO were awake and appreciative of the fact that Davis held out 2 canteen cups of hot coffee for them. "Thought this might help get the cobwebs out. Heated them up on some heat tabs we brought," Davis indicated, handing the coffee to them. "Thanks, Sergeant. Everything quiet?" Captain Harrison asked. "Up here, yes, sir. Down on the road, not so quiet. Look." Davis handed the captain a pair of binoculars. From their position, they were overlooking a wide spot in the highway to the northeast. While some vehicles were moving on the road, it appeared the logistic tail was setting up a refuel point off the side of the road, and numerous vehicles were already lined up to refuel. It also appeared that many vehicles had stopped for morning prayer. This was just too good to let slide. Looking to the northwest, Harrison liked what he saw even more: the lead elements of the first formation of combat vehicles. Picking up his radio handset, Captain Harrison transmitted his first request for an airstrike. The attack aircraft from the USS Saratoga had launched and were loitering over the Red Sea as they formed up. VF-35, the Black Panthers in their A-6 intruders, would make the ground attack with VF-74 and VF-103 in their F-14s, providing a fighter cap. The Black Panthers would go in low-level, using the mountainous terrain to mask their approach, while the Bedevilers and Sluggers maintained altitude to protect them from any attacking Iraqi interceptors. An hour after placing his initial call for an airstrike, Captain Harrison received word the strike package was finally formed up and ready to begin. While it felt like a long time, nearly an hour after he placed the call in for help, he had to keep in mind they didn't just keep strike packages loitering around indefinitely. Aircraft had to be refueled and, depending on what you phoned in, a particular set of ordnance had to be prepared. With the carrier sitting just 20 miles from the coast, it wouldn't take long for the package to arrive once it was ready. They didn't have to fly through hundreds of miles to reach the target. The A6 intruders had already figured out the best approach to the target. They were going to fly a route through the mountains. It was a little more dangerous flying close to the ground and the canyon walls, but it also all but eliminated their radar signatures and would help protect them from ground SAMs that might be waiting for them. The F-14s at altitude, however, would be painted by the SAMs and would have to avoid the SA-6 and SA-9 anti-aircraft missiles, especially the SA-6s. The route the intruders had selected brought them from the south through a wadi between two mountains. From where they entered the wadi, it was 3 miles to the target, which was a road between two mountain ridges, roughly 2 miles in length. The road was covered in a couple miles of wheeled and track vehicles from the 14th Division. They were sitting ducks, and there wasn't a damn thing they could do about it once the bombs started falling. Better yet, at the head of the target was a very narrow gorge the 14th Division vehicles had to pass through. With the right bombs, the road could be blocked, thus closing off the entire road. Aside from blowing up a bunch of vehicles, blocking that road was Harrison's plan for the first wave. Crater the road, or cause an avalanche of rock. The second wave would hit the vehicles that would be backed up on the road with nowhere to go until they found another way through the area. It'd be like shooting fish in a barrel. This first strike wouldn't be an easy flight for the intruders. The mountains would afford some cover from radar weapons as well as sighted weapons, but serious flying skills and advanced techniques would be required to avoid slamming into the canyon walls. Their position was over a mile away, high enough on the ridge to observe most of the road, but not the choke point. His only way of knowing the choke point was closed was when he saw vehicles began bunching up. Captain Harrison got the call that the first flight of 4 intruders was inbound from the southwest, following the road. They were going to fly low level for as long as possible before they had to pop up and release their load on the choke point. From his position, Harrison couldn't see them until they popped up. The sound of roaring jet engines zipping through the area nearly scared the hell out of the Americans. They barely had time to register the intruders, who were flying fast as hell as they popped up and banking hard over the far ridgeline, heading north. Seconds after they completed this insane maneuver, a massive cloud of dust and dirt rose from the gorge to the northwest of Harrison's position. The ground rumbled and briefly shook from the ear-piercing, thunderous booms of the explosions that rippled through the canyons. The sound waves seemed to echo and reverberate through the canyon walls. Moments later, Harrison saw a flash in his peripheral vision as something whipped past his position. It was the first of 4 A6 intruders making a run on the vehicles. The lead aircraft was swiftly followed by the 3 others. The first aircraft released 28 MQ-20 Rockeye cluster bombs as he passed over the convoy. An entire strip of vehicles and sections of the road blew apart. The second aircraft carried 28 Mk-82 500-pound dumb bombs. The last 2 aircraft had a mixture of MK-20 and Mk-82 bombs. "Holy shit!" yelled Ford, as the air was filled with flying bodies, vehicle parts, and secondary explosions. Jones and Holloman sat there mesmerized by the destruction before their eyes, as was the rest of the squad. "I sure don't ever want to be on the receiving end of that," one of the squad members said softly. For the next hour, the small American unit stayed hunkered down, just watching the confusion unfolding before them. Finally, Davis crawled over to Captain Harrison's position. "Captain, are we going to stay here or be leaving anytime soon?" "As soon as that dust settles and I get a good BDA, then I'll make that decision. Want to see if they have a way around this mess before we pull out. If they start bringing up road-clearing equipment, we may have to put in another strike today," Captain Harrison responded. "Sounds good, sir. Just wanted to be able to tell the kids what we're doing. Otherwise, they're going to start asking and fidgeting," Davis replied. "Good strike, by the way. I take back anything negative I've ever said about the chair force. You guys sure know how to call in the pain when it's required." Laughing at the comment, Harrison replied, "It's okay, Sergeant. It's a common misconception you grunts have about us TACPs. Most of you guys are oblivious to the fact that we're all Ranger qualified, as well as Halo, Airborne, and Combat Diver qualified. We're integrated into every SOF unit there is. Ironically, we hardly ever work with a line unit like yours. Staff Sergeant Davis, who had no idea the Air Force guys his squad was protecting were actually Special Forces, wore a look of bewilderment. Damn, sir. I've been a leg grunt in regular infantry units. I had no idea UTACPs were actually part of SOF. Here I was thinking you guys were just chair force. I owe you a beer when we get back to the world. Let's just get ready to sit tight for a little while and wait for the dust and smoke to settle a bit. If we need another strike, then so be it. If not, we'll get the hell out of here and relocate to another location or head back to the carrier. 2 hours later, the soldiers were burning through water. The heat of the day was really hitting them pretty hard, despite them not being in direct sunlight. Man, I'm burning up, Specialist Ford lamented to anyone around him. I could never get used to this heat. How do these people live like this? This ain't so bad, man. This is what you call a dry heat. I'll take this any day over the humid heat of central Tennessee. Now that's hot and terribly oppressive, Holloman countered. Holloman was from Clarksville, Tennessee. When his hitch in the Army was done, he fully intended to return there and go into real estate sales with his father. His dad, mother, and older brother had built a very successful real estate company in Clarksville over the last 10 years. How would you know? Kinnaird asked. You ain't from Tennessee, are you? Yep, sure am, Holloman stated. You ever pick tobacco? Ford asked. I worked with a friend on his granddad's farm picking tobacco in season. We used to chew on the leaves while we worked the field, Holloman explained. Interesting. The nicotine in the tobacco leaves can make you sick, can't it? Ford asked. Don't know about that. But every day, about an hour into work, my head would hurt, and I would be sick to my stomach, Holloman complained. Yep, that's the nicotine all right. Ford, how you know so much about it? Jones asked skeptically. Ford wasn't exactly thought of as one of the smartest guys in the platoon. A while back I was stationed at Fort Campbell on my first assignment before jump school. I'm going back there to go to college at Austin Peay University. All right, ladies, let's cut the noise and pay attention to what's out in front of us. Don't want any of these camel jockeys sneaking up on us, Staff Sergeant Davis chided them. He wanted them keeping an eye out on the enemy and not distracting each other with pointless idle chatter. The TACP remained in place for the day, watching the activity below. It was obvious that the road was blocked as vehicles were stopped and bunched together. Trucks worked their way up to what appeared to be a casualty collection point and departed with wounded Iraqi soldiers. No engineer equipment was seen coming forward. By late afternoon, some explosions could be heard in the vicinity of the choke point. Next to the small village to the east, it appeared that a refueling point was being established and a vehicle collection point as traffic flowed from the east, but nothing was moving west. After several hours had passed, several hundred vehicles were bunched together in the valley around the eastern village. Captain Harrison attempted to count but gave up and sent a report to his higher that he was looking at close to 2 brigades of combat vehicles just sitting together on the side of the road. The brass couldn't let this opportunity go to waste. Staff Sergeant Davis, Harrison called out. Davis crawled over to the captain. You called, Captain? Yeah, we're going to put in a second strike on those vehicles down there. He pointed at the cluster of them. And then we're going to get the hell out of here. Have your people ready to move when I give the word. As soon as the strike goes in, we're out of here. I can all but guarantee the Iraqis will know that it's a recon team calling in airstrikes on them. They'll be looking for us hard, Harrison told him, as they looked at the vehicles arrayed before them. It really was a lot of vehicles and soldiers down there. Vehicles and soldiers designed to kill if you got too close to them. I like that idea, sir. We'll be going back to the original LZ we came in on for the extraction, right? Harrison pulled the hand receiver down from his face as he turned to face Davis. You got it. I just got off the horn with the strike commander. He told me the first aircraft should be here in roughly 15 mics. Roger, sir. I'll get them packing. Davis replied, and moved off to get the squad ready. As he moved about, he had to be conscious not to silhouette himself on the ridge to the enemy below. He moved around to each position and briefed his guys and the 2 jarheads that joined them. No one objected to leaving the mountain after they got to watch another strike. The first indications they got that something was going on were the faint sounds of aircraft that sounded to be at some really high altitudes. The next indications were streaks of fast-moving smoke contrails zipping across the sky. 20,000 feet above the soldiers, F-14s were engaged in a fight with MiG-25s and MiG-29s, with twisting, turning aircraft shooting missiles at each other. It was obvious to those on the ground the enemy was ready for another American strike. The soldiers on the ground also started climbing into their vehicles, doing their best to scatter as fast as they could. Captain Harrison grabbed his binoculars, looking to see if he could spot any threats to the bombers coming in. He still had time to warn them if he spotted something. He spotted 2 SA-9 mobile launchers that were traversing their weapons systems in preparation for the incoming aircraft. Likewise, the SA-6 was already starting to engage at least some of the aircraft. 2 of their missiles had already been fired at something. Then one of the SA-6s blew apart. One of the attack aircraft must have fired one of their AGM-88 HARM missiles and nailed the vehicle. Moments later, one of the SA-9 platforms exploded. The remaining SA-9 fired off its 4 missiles in a ripple fire in the direction from which the A-6 intruders would approach. Davis looked over at Sergeant Stevens, who was all smiles as he lowered his laser designator. Davis gave him a thumbs up. Screaming loudly around the bend in one of the canyons, the first intruder came in fast and low, leveling out just long enough to release its stick of 500-pound bombs across a half-mile stretch of road. Trucks and armored vehicles started exploding from the bombs. The second intruder had turned and entered the stretch of the canyon to carry out its own bombing run, only to get slammed by 2 of the SA-9's missiles. The pilot and weapons officer didn't have a chance to react or even realize the missiles were headed right for them. The plane exploded and disintegrated, leaving flaming parts of it to be flung across the ground. The remaining 2 missiles slammed into the canyon walls, coming up empty. The last 2 intruders zipped in quick and leveled out just in time to release their own sticks of MK-20 cluster bombs. With each aircraft carrying 28 bombers, it was a devastating attack. When the intruders angled their aircraft up and out of the canyon, a ZSU filled the sky with 23mm rounds. Bright red tracer fire zipped all around the 2 intruders until one of them had a wing ripped clean off. The aircraft caught fire and spun out of control. Fortunately, the pilot and his partner managed to eject before the plane eventually crashed to the ground. The last intruder managed to escape and looked to be heading back out in the direction of the sea. The lone SA-6 then fired off 2 more missiles at some unseen aircraft, adding more missiles and confusion to the area. "Okay, that's it. Let's get the hell out of here. We have a chopper to catch," Captain Harrison shouted to Staff Sergeant Davis and his soldiers. He didn't have to say it twice. Each man grabbed his rucksack and weapon and set out in single file, moving to the south and away from the road. The pickup point was in the bottom of a wadi, large enough for the aircraft to get into. It also offered protection from direct fire weapons and a good egress route to fly out. It was a little over 3 miles away, but it was a downhill run. The only drawback was that it would be dark soon, which would slow their pace. The young soldiers didn't care. They were feeling pretty good about what they had accomplished this day. One thought kept creeping into each soldier's mind. We all came together. We all go home together, even with a couple of jarheads along for the ride. Chapter 43. Move out. 18th August, 1990. 82nd Airborne Division. Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. General Buckner was drinking a cup of coffee and looking over the latest intelligence reports as well as the current boots-on-the-ground reports. The 82nd Airborne Division flag had been in Jeddah for the past 72 hours, and 2 brigades were now on the ground. The 3rd Brigade was stateside, but would be coming over once the division tail had flowed in sufficiently, along with the division commander, Major General Pete Ford. Shooters are great to have, but if they don't have the supplies they need, the critical maintenance, the communications, and the fire support, then they're just in the way. Those items were flowing in now and were sufficient to support the 2 brigades he had here and now. Thanks to the Navy and the carrier battle group offshore, transport aircraft were flowing in unmolested by Iraqi Air Force interceptors. "Excuse me, sir, but the staff is ready to brief you and the commanders," said Colonel Dobbins, the G3 for the 82nd, sticking his head in the commandeered office in the main terminal. "Good, I'll be right there." General Buckner finished his coffee and stood to leave. He wasn't one for keeping people waiting. The walk to the conference room was short, but he made sure he paused along the way to speak with the occasional soldier he met in the hall, who wasn't part of the everyday headquarters staff. He liked to get the pulse of the division from these guys not in the head shed. It was always interesting what you learned from these kids. They had no problem telling it like it was when their NCOs weren't around. As he walked into the conference room, someone called, "Attention." "Keep your seats, folks," Buckner said before anyone could stand. He moved quickly to his seat. "Okay, Colonel, let's get on with it." The briefing was always conducted in a set manner. The intel officer, G2, was first, followed by the operations officer, G3, then the G4 supply officer. Special staff would coordinate ahead of time with the operations officer if they had something that needed to be covered. This was not the meeting to bring up routine administrative stuff. That was done with the assistant division commander for support or the chief of staff in his daily meeting. "Good morning, sir," the G2, Lieutenant Colonel Mackenzie, said. Buckner acknowledged him with a nod. Also present were the 3 brigade commanders with their battalion commanders, the artillery battalion commanders, the air defense commanders, and the Cav squadron commander. Respective operations officers for each had also tagged along. "Sir, as you know, the USS Saratoga hit the 14th Iraqi Division about 30 miles east of Duba in some very rugged terrain." He paused long enough to point at the map where the airstrike had taken place. Imagery shows that they brought down a mountainside that closed the road and cratered it in several places. It also looks like they destroyed or seriously degraded at least 1 and possibly 2 full battalions worth of soldiers and equipment. It was quite the turkey shoot. That strike went in yesterday morning. A handful of hours later, in the afternoon, the vehicles got bunched up again once they'd cleared the obstacle, so the TACPs called in a second strike and hammered them again. Right now it appears the 14th Division is down somewhere around 30% strength and stuck. This morning we received a new satellite picture of the area. It looks like a large portion of the unit is still trying to figure a way around the choke point we've created. They're essentially stuck between a rock and a hard place, no pun intended. General Buckner stopped him. "Colonel, what kind of losses did the Saratoga's wing sustain, and is it possible for them to go back in and hammer the division again? I'd really like that group thoroughly beat up before they're able to come towards us." "Sir, in the first strike, the Navy lost a single F-14 to an SA-6. 2 of the intruders took some minor damage but returned to the carrier. The second strike, they weren't so lucky. The Iraqis were ready for them this time around. The fighter cap had to fight off a swarm of MiGs. They shot down 2 MiG-29s and 4 MiG-25s at a loss of 4 additional F-14s. 2 more F-14s were lost to SA-6s. 3 of the 4 A-6 intruders were also shot down during their bombing runs. The CAG on the Saratoga said it appeared only one of the crews from the A-6s was able to eject. They look to have landed near the Iraqis. 4 of the 6 F-14 crews also ejected. No word on their whereabouts. The Navy tried to launch a CSR twice, but was forced to turn back on both occasions. As to additional strikes, the Saratoga says they need to focus on wild weasel missions for a few days and do more to regain air superiority before they go back in on another bombing mission. Since the start of the campaign, they've lost a total of 8 A-6s and 10 F-14s. The ship is down nearly 40% of its air wing, the colonel explained. Damn, these Iraqi pilots and air defenses are a tad better than I think we first thought. Okay, if the Navy isn't able to hit them, what about the Air Force? Let's get on the horn with them and find out if they can pick up the slack for us, Buckner said, before he motioned for the colonel to get back on track with his brief. Sir, in the East, the 7th and 5th Republican Guard Divisions of the 2nd Republican Guards Corps are located with 5th Mechanized Division at Ar-Ras. Here, he pointed at a location on the map, and the lead elements of the 7th Division are at Al-Dulaymiya. They've paused after a combination of airstrikes from the carrier in combination with elements of the Saudi Armor Brigade and Saudi National Guard. It appears that the 7th will be the main effort heading along Highway 60, this major highway to Medina, with the 5th conducting a supporting attack to the south. There are no major or secondary roads that lead to Medina, and the terrain is a combination of rocky, broken, hard-packed sand interlaced with wadis. However, it is ideal maneuver ground for vehicles until they reach a series of broken ground along this line from As-Sumariya in the north to Al-Rathaya in the center and Hazra in the south. The next line of defensible terrain is west of Medina and runs along a series of broken ridgelines from Shajwa in the north to Al-Mindasa, Al-Jafar, south to Al-Utama, in the center to Al-Seda, and finally Al-Mwerd in the south, the intelligence officer said, as he traced a line on the map. Critical points along this line are at Al-Mwerd in the south and at Al-Seda and Al-Bardia in the center. Al-Mwerd and Al-Seda offer easy access to the coast, but both are also defensible choke points by light infantry, as is this choke point at Al-Bardia. This is the line for the best defensible terrain east of Jeddah. Once past this point, they're on the coastal plain and have an unopposed path to Jeddah, Lieutenant Colonel Mackenzie concluded. General Buckner leaned forward in his chair and studied the map for a few minutes without saying anything, appearing to be lost in thought. "What's the name of this ridgeline?" he asked. "Sir, the Saudis don't have a name for it. To them it's just a ridgeline," the G2 said. "From now on, we're going to call this ridge the Medina Ridge," General Buckner said. "Roger, sir," Lieutenant Colonel Mackenzie acknowledged. "Okay, let's continue," Buckner said. "Sir, the weather for today and the next 24 hours is clear sky with temperatures reaching 125 degrees later today. Tonight, the temperature will drop to 85 degrees. The sun will rise in the east and set in the west," Lieutenant Colonel Mackenzie said. It was a staff game to see who could make the most dramatic statement during the brief, and the general enjoyed it. He raised his eyebrows at this last statement. "Good to see some things don't change, Mac," General Buckner replied with a slight smile. "Sir, I will be followed by the G3, Mackenzie said as he stepped aside for the next guy. "Aren't you always?" bantered back General Buckner. The staff snickered as the G3 approached the map, which was covered by a clear sheet of acetate with blue and red symbols. "Sir, currently the Saudi National Guard units that were in Buraida and Unaiza have withdrawn and are moving into Medina. Elements of the Saudi Armored Brigade, part of the 45th Armored Brigade, are conducting a delay action in front of the 7th and 5th Republican Guard divisions. They're falling back towards Medina. Major Scooter, our TACP, is with them and has been calling in support from the 71st Fighter Wing. The Saudi 8th Mechanized Brigade that was along the Yemen border has moved up to and is occupying positions around Taif and guarding the approaches to Mecca. The Saudi 10th Mechanized Brigade that was pushed out of Tabuk is withdrawing south and has set up numerous company-size ambushes through the passes in this area, delaying the forward progress of the 2nd Iraqi Corps. The 2 airstrikes that have hit the 2nd Army Corps over the past 2 days have bloodied their nose and have them moving with more caution than they had been, the G3 said, pausing to check his notes. Unfortunately, Iraqi air defense systems have taken their toll on the Navy flyboys. Okay, what about our current status? General Buckner asked. Sir, we currently have 1st and 2nd Brigade completely on the ground, minus vehicles. The Cav Squadron has 1 troop of Sheridans that were flown in. Div Arty has 2 battalions of 105s, and Corps Artillery has 1 battery of 155 on the ground. We have a shortage of ammo for these weapons, as well as a shortage of anti-tank ammo for the TOWs, which at this point are dismounted. Attached, we have the Rapid Reaction Team from the 24th Division with 4 Bradleys and 4 Abrams tanks. The flow is steady, with about 1 plane every hour bringing in the division, and we should close the division personnel within the next 24 hours. Vehicles are not expected for 2 or 3 weeks at the outside. So what you're saying there, Colonel, is we're supposed to stop 2 divisions from the east and 3 divisions from the north with 2 brigades of paratroopers and 2 companies of armored vehicles, General Buckner said, leaning forward in his chair, elbows on his knees. That's almost right, sir, the G3 responded reluctantly. 18th Airborne Corps says the 10th Saudi Mechanized Brigade is going to take on the 2nd Iraqi Corps as it attempts to move south through this terrain. The TACP from 1st of the 325 is aboard the carrier and is being inserted with the 10th to direct airstrikes from the carrier. We, on the other hand, get to play with the 2nd Republican Guard Corps heading to Medina. Corps says as soon as our last load is in, the 101st will commence flowing in, with their Apache helicopters being on the first plane. Sitting back up quickly and looking about with a smile, Buckner said, "Well, looks like we have the Iraqis right where we want them, all around us. Now they're in for it. What's your recommended course of action?" Sir, there are 3 courses of action that we've developed. Option A, the G3 picked up a pointer and pointed to the north, is for us to deploy along a defensive line east of Medina from Al-Malwi in the north to Al-Ankil in the south for our 2 brigades, and from Al-Ankil to Ad-Dumayriya, using the elements of the Saudi 45th Armored Brigade, with our mechanized forces attached to them. It's a long distance of 74 miles, but the terrain behind them is really bad, and we're accepting risk in this area. To the north, the terrain is crap for mechanized or armor forces, so the level of risk is low. They'll have to stay on the road and dismount their infantry to move forward, the G3 concluded. General Buckner sat and studied the map. Grinning, he said, "Okay, let's hear what your next course of action is." Option B, sir, is from Ad-Dulu in the north to Medina, to Ad-Dumayriya in the south. This is some of the worst terrain in Saudi Arabia. It's mostly broken wadis with 10 to 20-foot ridges, many of them with sheer drop-offs or walls. To make this work, we tie in the Saudi National Guard in Medina, and we take the south side, offering support to the Saudis if necessary. Place the Saudi armored forces in reserve on the south side in case the 5th attempts to flank to the south, the colonel said. Again, the general leaned forward to study the map, then got up and walked up to the wall to get a better look. His fingers traced along a few points as he moved around the map, really studying the 2 options they'd presented him. "Okay, what else you got? I'm not sold on these 2 options," General Buckner announced. "Sir, the final course of action we have for your consideration is to establish a defensive line west of Medina along this ridgeline, the Medina Ridge. It'd stretch from Al-Mindasa in the north, south to Al-Bardia, and continue to Al-Utama. This allows us to bottle up any wheeled or mechanized movements out of the Medina area and keeps them trapped in the mountains. This is essentially really good paratrooper country, given we don't have a lot of armor support ourselves. If we position our artillery right and build up some fire bases and some really good defensive positions, we should be able to keep the Iraqis bottled up in this area for many months, at least until we're able to bring in some serious armored forces of our own. Once that happens, we'll be able to punch our way out of this area. You couple that with our Apaches and A-10 Warthogs for ground support aircraft, and we should be able to decimate these Iraqi divisions. I'll be the first to admit we're essentially losing a lot of ground early on. But we're the ones choosing the ground we want to take a stand on. We're also forcing the Iraqis to really stretch their supply lines incredibly long. This'll give our special forces and ranger units some good opportunities to run hit-and-run desert operations against their supply lines. Kind of like the SAS Desert Rats did in World War II, against Rommel, the colonel explained. General Buckner stood and proudly placed his hands on his hips as he announced, "I love it. The chance to pretend to be a cross between Montgomery, Patton, and the SAS Desert Rats. Wow is all I can say. You've sold me. Let's move forward with option C." The officers all got a good laugh. It broke the tension and stress they'd all been under. Buckner quickly added, "In all seriousness, guys, option C is the better route. I hate giving up this much ground and potentially letting the Iraqis grab Medina itself, but the Saudis are never going to let us fight for it or fight around it. At least this option does allow us to really choose where we want to make a stand. Now, I'd like you all to start identifying where we would place our artillery. The guns are going to be critical for our guys. Make sure we're factoring in how best to use the 105s and 155s, so we have good overlapping fields of fire. If you have to, get on the horn back to 18th Corps headquarters and tell them you need a battery of 155s or a battalion of 105s sent to Jeddah immediately. Insist on them tasking a National Guard unit if need be. Sometimes they're more nimble in deploying than a regular Army unit. Just to get creative in getting soldiers here. Okay, sir. If you want to move forward with option C, then that concludes my brief. We really hadn't come up with an option D, the G3 added. Buckner laughed. Well, I'm glad I liked option C then. Let's get it all drawn up and present it to 18th Airborne Corps. I'll talk to General Luck and see if he can get us some additional artillery and munitions deployed from the States. I think General Luck and I would both feel a hell of a lot better knowing we could rain down some holy hell on the enemy when the time comes. Also, someone get Corps and find out if a couple squadrons of A-10s could be repositioned to Jeddah, and if not there, then an Egyptian base across the Red Sea. We need those aircraft to help us go against all these freaking divisions if we don't want to get run over, General Buckner ordered, as he gave several of his folks a hard stare. They knew what they had to do. Arriving at General Luck's office in the main terminal building, Buckner saw the office door was closed and the aide was seated in the outer office. "Afternoon, sir," the aide said. "Afternoon, Major. Is the General in?" "Yes, sir. I'll let him know you're here," the Major said, standing and moving to the closed door. He knocked and opened it. "Excuse me, sir, but General Buckner is here to see you," the aide announced, acknowledging the other officer with a nod. "Damn good timing," General Luck said. Then, in a loud voice, "Buckner, get your ass in here." As Buckner walked into the room, he noticed the other officer sitting in the overstuffed chair in front of General Luck's desk. General Hugh Sheldon uncurled his 6'4" frame from the chair and extended his hand. "Long time no see, Buck. How you doing?" he said. "I'm doing a damn sight better now," Buckner responded, grabbing Sheldon's hand. They had served together several times over the course of their Army careers and had great respect for each other, even though they were in rival divisions. "When did you get in, and what toys did you bring?" "Landed about 2 hours ago, and I have part of one of our attack helicopter battalions with me. They should be operational by the 21st or 22nd. 24 Apaches with plenty of ammo," Sheldon declared with a wide grin on his face. "Buck, I was just telling Hugh that I'm putting the 101st in at Yanbu up north a ways," Luck said. "There's an airport there that can handle the heavy aircraft, which will allow for some dispersion of our forces. It'll allow us to increase, if not double, our flow. And there's also a usable port there for offloading ships. The way things are shaping up, they may be needed real soon. Best make it the 21st if you could, General Luck pressed. I'm sure we'll have a good portion of the aircraft operational by the 21st. Are you expecting company by then? Sheldon asked, with a raised eyebrow. Snorting at the question as he tried to stifle a slight chuckle, Buckner countered. Company? How about 2 divisions coming at us from the east, and as much as 4 divisions from the north, all closing in on us over the next 72 to 96 hours? The 7th and 5th Divisions of the 2nd Republican Guard Corps are about to enter Medina. The 2nd Army Corps is coming down from the north with the 7th, 37th, and the 51st Infantry Divisions. The Iraqis appeared to have left the 2nd Infantry Division in Tabuk and attempted to push the 14th to the coast. Unfortunately for them, we caught them in some really nasty terrain and chewed them up with airstrikes from the carrier Saratoga. Opposing the 7th, 37th, and 51st is the 10th Saudi Mechanized Brigade, and that's about all that's standing between them and punching us in the face. If the 7th, 37th, and 51st link up with the 7th Adnan and the 5th Baghdad in Medina, we're going to have real problems holding the last line of defense. Add to the fact that the Iraqi Air Force seems to have improved to being a near par to our own, and we're in a world of hurt. Of course, I'd never admit that in front of the troops, but it's just the 3 of us. Damn! What kind of trap did you guys drag my division into? What have we got right now to hold these guys off until more help arrives? Sheldon said nervously as he looked the 2 paratroopers in the eyes. Currently, we've got 2+ brigades of the 82nd. The rest should be here by Cobb tonight. A company team from the 24th who brought with them 4 M1 tanks and 4 Bradley fighting vehicle. We have the MEU from the Tarawa, but don't know how long we keep them. In addition, we have the 8th Saudi Mechanized Brigade, which is moving north along the coast to join us, General Luck explained. We also have remnants of the 45th Saudi Armored Brigade, which has been fighting a delaying action from Bereda back to Medina. The sooner we can get your attack aircraft going, the better. Those Apaches may be the deciding factor between us holding the line and handing the Iraqis their first major defeat, and us getting humiliatingly thrown into the Red Sea and summarily relieved of our commands and put out to pasture, General Lucky bluntly exclaimed. Sir, you sure paint a beautiful picture. Your namesake had better come true, sir, General Sheldon. Sir, Buckner interjected, that ridge, we're officially calling it Medina Ridge. My staff is presenting our plan for a defense along that ridge as we speak. We're going to turn that place into a meat grinder like nothing the Iraqis have ever seen. Trust me when I say we're going to stop them butt cold along this ridgeline. Luck grunted at the assessment. Just make sure the plan your folks are drafting to be sent up the flagpole is rock solid. I don't need to tell you, gentlemen, that a lot is riding on this plan and these next 5 or 6 days. Everyone knows about the unit's heritage during World War II. By the end of next week, the Corps will have a new heritage, whether it'll be one of an incredible and profound victory or an utterly humiliating loss and defeat. I'm telling you both right now, I'd rather die on that fucking ridge surrounded by a pile of dead Iraqi soldiers than live in defeat. Don't let me, the Corps, the Army, or the country down.
Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another video.
In the meantime, we have plenty of reading material to keep you busy. You can find it all on our website, frontlinepublishinginc.com.